Caddis Maximus here, this time with a review of the Harbor Freight digital calipers. These are the 6, the 8, the 12-inch, and then of course the long reach brake digital calipers. I built these up over a few years. Harbor Freight's actually been selling these units for a long time, 5 to 10 years. They are all still available on the website. As evidence of how long they've been selling them, Harbor Freight has 7 or 8 6-inch digital calipers on their website, of which there's only 3 actual units. They have so many duplicates. Like with the digital calipers, they actually have it listed 3 times with the same photo and description with 3 different part numbers. But they're all still available. They are a bit more expensive. I think when I bought these 12-inch several years ago with a coupon, they're like $35. I was noticing that they've gone up to $50. These are obviously not the best dial caliper or digital calipers, but they do work, and there's a couple of caveats. There's been a lot of debate. I've worked in a machine shop, and there's obviously a ton of debate about these. No, they're not Starretts or Mitutoyos or any other kind of real higher quality unit, but if you use them properly and keep them properly adjusted, they're not grossly inaccurate either. And for the price, they're hard to beat. The machinist and precision measuring tools, the prices just start skyrocketing, well over $100 when you start getting real expensive ones. Even companies like Starrett now have their sub and above $100 tools. So the older ones have these black backgrounds and the newer ones have these silver backgrounds. I believe both the 8 and the 12 now include silver backgrounds. If I may be incorrect, these are just basic. Whoever makes these, this is like a common design. So you'll see that there's a bunch of different knockoff brands that all look exactly the same. They all have a simple battery port, which is pretty easy to access. They, of course, being digital, they both read metric and Imperial just through a press of the button. And the standard 0. These are incremental only, meaning when you turn them on and off, they're always at 0 wherever they're sitting at. It doesn't know exactly where the head is sitting on this bar. How this works is there's a bunch of little lines. They're not printed, they're like magnetic, I believe. And on absolute ones, those lines actually, the spacing slightly progresses down, so the head knows exactly where it's at. These, it's all even. So whenever you turn this on, if you want to measure something, you have to turn it on, you have to run it down to the bottom, and you have to zero it out. And what I mean by that is if, say on these KD, these are some Napa ones, these are just a little bit more expensive. These do have a larger screen. The 8-inch and the 6-inch Harbor Freight calipers do have small screens, where the 12-inch and the brake calipers actually have large screens. So I did like that quite a bit. And actually, before I forget, all these, and I'm not exactly sure, have these little adapter boards that I'm not sure if that's for testing, but that seems to be common with the, or if it's for like a digital readout. I suspect it may be for some kind of external readout. And of course, 2 adjustment screws. These are always little tiny slot heads. There's like a little brass shim that these screws press against, and that's how you adjust the head. Now, if we were comparing to incremental calipers like these KDs, what's interesting is I can be at any position. I can turn it on, and it will show me the absolute position. I can switch it to incremental, and it'll just turn on and be 0, just like the Harbor Freight. But the difference of this one is I can turn it off, run it way up here, turn it back on, and it knows how far I've moved it exactly. And so that's one feature that will set apart a slightly more expensive digital caliper, is the fact that it will be an absolute as well as an incremental. And those do help with accuracy and prevent mistakes, because when they're absolute, they're always zeroed even when you turn them on and off. So if you forget to run it down and re-zero it, it's not the end of the world. And so that's the big selling point of an absolute. Let's take a look at these brake calipers. These have all been pretty smooth and all had pretty even beams, not bent. Sometimes they've been a little gritty, but I recommends buying these in the store if at all possible. With Harbor Freight and 800 stores, there shouldn't be one like that far away. Because when you buy them online, you're kind of stuck at the mercy of the less than great quality control. But in the store, you can go through a couple, 3 boxes and find one that's not so gritty, or that seems to be like the really nicely made on a Wednesday unit. And that's what I did with these, because I'll admit, some of them, like, they didn't clean them very well after machining, and you can really feel the grit. The one thing I'll say about these long reach brake disc calipers, is they're more than useful for brake discs. There's all sorts of situations where I needed to reach around some object and get a nice measurement on a couple of points, and that makes these have a huge advantage. These types from professional brands are really expensive. $200 and $300 is what I've seen online. The one thing I will mention about these, and they all seem to have that same issue, is whenever they were machining them, there's some kind of issue where it's just a little bit thicker right at the end, so I've always had problems with it being really tight right about the last 1/4 inch or something, but they do slowly wear and break in. Now, what I mean by keeping them properly adjusted is all you have to do is take any kind of calipers, whether they're mechanical, and just try to wobble the moving jaw back and forth. If you feel it wobbling back and forth, you'll just need to put in a screwdriver and adjust the tension, and just to the point to where it's fairly stiff. When you get calipers, they're not actually supposed to just be super easy to move back and forth. They're supposed to have a fair amount of friction so that when you're doing your measurement, it doesn't want to move around so easily. If you reposition your hand, you can feel it, and it gives you a more solid measurement because it's more friction. Now, and you might be curious about that, but if you ever buy something like Mitutoyo's or Starrett's, particularly dial type, like this pair of Starrett, this is not an American-made Starrett. This is what would be considered their more budget conscious. But even them are still really nice. And when you get them from the factory, they actually have a fair amount of resistance. It's really pretty surprising, but you get really reliable measurements that way. And so once you start realizing what like the real professional grade ones do, you will just adjust the Harbor Freights accordingly, where you'd say, wow, it's pretty loose just by moving it by hand. I'm going to tighten both these screws up until I don't feel any wobble in the jaw, and I have a nice amount of friction. So I did want to really emphasize that, and you'll have much more quality measurements. I mean, I've seen a lot of complaints about this one, and this one's been just great for me. I just make sure it's adjusted and it has a good amount of tension on it. And I've compared it against stacks of gauge blocks after repeated uses, and it definitely works. I do have some gauge blocks, but I didn't want to bring them out for just these review purposes to prove that they measure properly. You just have to be meticulous and have good technique and have properly adjusted tools. Otherwise, if you use the coupons and the Inside Track Club, you can probably get all 4 of these for like $100. And then you have a nice variety of measuring tools. You have a 6-inch, which would be general use, so you wouldn't have to worry so much if you dropped it or got a little banged up. And then the larger ones are really invaluable in many situations. And the fact that they're just phenomenally expensive, pretty much from anywhere else besides Harbor Freight or online ordering of other cheap equivalents. And so for me, they're generally recommended. They've performed as expected, and for their price, you really can't complain very much at all. And I guess my biggest gripe would be, it would be nicer if they also were absolute. Then you would have more reliable measurements over the long duration of time. That way, when you're zeroing out these, if you have a piece of grit of the jaws or something, absolute calipers, are less susceptible to errors because of that. I guess that's all I really had to say. This was just a basic review and a video just to kind of dispel some of the myths about the horribly inaccurate Harbor Freight digital calipers. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody watching. If you haven't subscribed, please do subscribe. Catus Maximus out.